I'm Josh Christensen.
I'm Bryan Lufkin.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, Fast Company's staff writer, Pavitra Mohan.
So as of last year, there are now over 1 million robots operating in Amazon warehouses.
CEO of TED, Logan McClure Davda.
We're really asking ourselves not just kind of how to be relevant in this moment, but how can we most meaningfully contribute to this moment?
And as always, keeping tabs.
So the game starts out and you're in kind of like this wasteland and everyone's like, where are the humans?
But first, here's the download. The news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
On Tuesday morning, over a month after the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran and started the ongoing war, President Donald Trump threatened Iran that, quote, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, if the country didn't accept ceasefire agreements and reopen the critical oil passageway of the Strait of Hormuz. Then, Tuesday night, Trump completely walked back the threat, posting on social media that a ceasefire agreement has been reached and will last 2 weeks. Both the U.S. and Iran have called it a victory for their respective sides. In response, the Dow jumped over 1,200 points and oil prices dipped on Wednesday. But much remains up in the air as the entire world awaits next developments in the conflict that has killed over 5,000 people, over 3,000 in Iran, including civilians and children, as well as 13 U.S. service members.
You know, no one needs my take on geopolitics, but just from a personal standpoint, I know we're a business publication, but it always feels weird to have to pivot to well, the price of gas for people is it's like, God, I know that people struggle and that's a real thing. But when you just look at the human toll and those last numbers that you read, it's like, okay, we're a business publication. We're going to talk about the stock market. We're going to talk about the price of oil and its business implications. But that is certainly several orders of magnitude less important than, thousands dead.
Yeah, yesterday was, just bracing for possible World War III, right?
Yeah.
And even more loss of life. It's crazy.
Anyways, let's pivot out of that to something else a little more cheery, I guess. We can only go up from here.
From World War III.
Anthropic has announced a new AI model called Mythos. Mythos. What is with people? We're going to get into this later, but people naming their technology really intense things.
But Josh, they're changing the world. Hello?
It's just Mythos. I don't know why I pronounced it with such an accent. Mythos.
I bet Anthropic would love for us to take on that voice every time we use it in conversation as part of their branding strategy.
Well, they announced a new AI model called Mythos. But said it wouldn't be publicly available because the AI is too powerful. Anthropic described Mythos as described it as the most powerful. I'm just going to keep pushing through.
Yeah, do it.
As the most capable frontier model to date. So much so that it breached its own safeguards. So for now, Anthropic is only letting a handful of companies use Mythos.
Mythos. Thank you. I was going to do it anyway, but I'm glad that you paused.
These include Google, Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, NVIDIA, and JP Morgan Chase.
Yeah. I don't know. It's all crazy.
It's I'm sure it's a very powerful benchmarking, but it feels a little... I would rather companies act responsibly. I think that's good. But if part of me is also how much of this is PR? How much of this is Anthropic being we created a model so big, so huge. I don't know why I'm going into Trump voice.
And he's doing the listeners.
Mythos is so big, so huge.
That was really
Dario Amade's not going to appreciate that. But it's it feels a little bit yes, I'm sure this is a responsible move and they probably should be doing this and it probably is really powerful, but it also looks good for Anthropic to be
yeah, of course.
Guys, this is so crazy what we just made that we can't release it to everyone. It's like a Birkin bag.
Shout out our boy Rob from the Traders.
You got it.
for Mora. Is he going to get her access to Mythos? I don't know. Well, I guess we'll find out in season 5. Apple is back in court against Epic Games, maker of Fortnite, one of the most popular video games in the world with hundreds of millions of registered users. Legal disputes between Apple and Epic started back in 2020 when Epic tried to bypass Apple's 30% commission on in-app purchases. Apple banned Fortnite and Epic Games sued, accusing Apple of being a monopoly. The court ruled Apple was not a monopoly, but they had to allow apps to have external payment options. Apple complied, but they still demanded a 27% commission on those outside sales. The Northern California District Court found Apple in contempt. Apple tried to get a rehearing of the decision but got rejected. Now it plans to take the battle to the Supreme Court. On Monday, the court granted Apple's motion, but Epic Games challenged it right away.
Are you a Fortnite player or
I've actually
Epic Games?
never played Fortnite before.
No? Any Epic Games?
No, not really.
Nothing.
It's not my bag.
Fortnite. Yeah. I do like Fortnite.
Yeah.
And Rocket League. I do really like Rocket League.
Okay, check this out. This was several years ago. I booted up I think it was my Switch, and Fortnite was just there. They just added it against my will. And then I was like, okay, well, it's free. And then I played it, and then I didn't like it.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. And I think that I get really aggressive on these multiplayer online games, despite the fact that I'm probably losing to like an 11-year-old.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
You certainly are.
shouting obscenities in my apartment. It's just bad for everybody. So I don't play Fortnite.
Oh, next story. People in Nashville can now use Waymo. Riders will be able to get Waymo directly through its app, and the service will eventually be available through Lyft as well. Lyft is apparently going to handle services like vehicle maintenance and charging. Nashville is the 11th city to roll out Waymo robo-taxis. Have you been seeing the test cars around New York City of Waymo? I saw one right outside our building the other day. Driver in the seat. They're doing it. It's not rolling out, I don't think anytime soon, but it's coming.
Whoa.
It's coming.
Have you been inside one?
I have not been inside one yet.
I have some friends in San Francisco who've been in one. When I lived in San Francisco, I remember the big thing was just ride sharing had started. And I remember being in an Uber for the first time.
Yeah.
People were like, it's so cool. It's just like someone's car.
Is that when they had mustaches still on the cars?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wait, was that Lyft or Uber?
Oh, it might have been Lyft. I can't remember.
I forgot about that though. But yes, that is when it was. And those were the days where it's like cool. They like talk to you and like shoot the shit.
Oh,
Where are you guys going today? And I'm like, I want to talk to nobody.
There's nothing. I always request quiet car. I always request do not talk to me.
Especially like, just, after like a night out and you're like 6 vodka sodas or whatever.
Do not want to have a conversation.
No, don't talk to me.
I always put my AirPods in anyways.
That's
so even if they try, it's usually not a problem in New York, but in like
I was
other
about to say,
places.
that's very New York. Like, don't speak to me.
Yeah. Phoenix though, they will chat you up.
It's a chatty city.
Have you seen a Zoox though? It's a Waymo competitor.
No.
I don't know who owns the company, but the cars just look like if you ordered a Waymo on Temu, you would get a Zoox.
Why? What do you mean? What does it look like?
It looks like, you know how
is
like
it falling,
Waymo,
are there like screws and bolts like falling out of it? Is it
more or less like
jalopy?
The way Waymo is like it's a car that has the sensors built into it in a very sleek and designed way. It's aesthetically very well designed. Zoox just feels like they retrofitted an old car with just like the sensors.
Oh.
Hey, it looks very DIY compared to a Waymo that's very like sleek and
I don't think
put
I would
together.
feel safe per se.
Yeah, the Zoox is maybe a bridge too far for me right now.
I mean, I'm still coming around on Roombas, let alone Waymos. Now we have AI.
Same technology, LiDAR, baby.
Boom. You know what? Everything old is new again, right? Amazon and the United States Postal Service reached a deal after a tense standoff that's lasted for months. Amazon, one of USPS's biggest parcel providers, had threatened to cut its USPS deliveries by 2/3. But now Amazon is only reducing the packages by 20%, according to reporting by the Wall Street Journal and Reuters. But this can still hurt USPS revenues. Amazon is their biggest customer, and it makes up about 15% of their deliveries. The Journal says, quote, USPS has been a key cog in Amazon's shipping network, providing a significant portion of the so-called last-mile deliveries of packages to people's homes. USPS lost $9 billion last year and may run out of money by next year due to high operating costs, debt, and declining volume of mail to ship.
Ooh, more on Amazon to come in this episode. So we can
stay tuned.
Stick a pin in that for now.
Mythos.
And that's the news you need to know today. So, Bryan, if you could give a TED Talk, what topic would it be on?
Okay. I believe that, because, I'm very, very, cautious when it comes to food and expiration dates. For example, if I have, say, some pasta leftovers, been in the fridge for a couple days, you Google, and AI Google overview might say, you need to get rid of that immediately. You're going to be risking all kinds of diseases, horrible things. But then it doesn't smell. It's totally fine. And then I'll sense check with a friend, or if I'm FaceTiming my family or something. It's would you guys eat? Yeah, it was fine. I'm just so I believe there is a conspiracy out there around Best By dates, expiration dates. And my TED Talk would be you know what? Follow
your heart
and your nose. Toucan Samet. See if it smells.
Trust your senses. This is Bryan saying, do your own research, audience.
Do your own research. Eat the old pasta. And
Bryan becomes the Jenny McCarthy of Best By dates.
Okay, this actually might be my new calling. I'm going to be the Best By date guy.
God, Best By is misleading. The company Best By, catching strays. Best By X date, or sell by dates are just really unhelpful because it just shifts the emotional labor to you.
Yeah, and look, I'm already a hypochondriac, so I don't need Google AI overview saying...
I mean, it's Best By now, but really, use your own judgment. You're I have to do this work now? I have to do this work?
Yes, I already have a lot on my plate, figuratively and metaphorically.
I want to go the opposite way. I don't want to trust my own senses. I want the package of what to say. Now, obviously, if you make something, then that's on you now. You've accepted the responsibility.
Yeah.
But if I buy milk, or if I buy any food, I don't want Best By or sell by dates, because sell by also drives me crazy, because it's are they saying
and then what's the difference?
What's the difference? I want them to say, don't eat after.
Yes. See, now you understand my
That's what
struggle.
I want.
Yeah. So I'm just sick of all of the confusing messaging out there from big food and big internet. And I'm just going to say to myself, you know what? Trust your own judgment. Follow your heart. Follow your nose. Eat the pasta.
Get Bryan a pop star headset and a PowerPoint and put him on stage at the next TED conference.
And I'll be like, mythos.
Well, we're talking about this because later in today's episode, Bryan interviews the new CEO of TED about everything that's happening with this 40-year-old brand. So stay tuned for that. But as promised, today we're talking about Amazon and if the robot job apocalypse has already begun. Amazon has increasingly been relying on robotics in their fulfillment centers. In 2025, they disclosed that there were 1 million robots operating at its warehouses, which is nearly as many humans as they employ. On top of that, a Wall Street Journal analysis last year reported that the average number of human workers per facility was the lowest it had been in 16 years. That's roughly 670 people per facility. Fast Company staff writer Pavitra Mohan joined Bryan and I to talk about what workers think about the robots taking over and how warehouses are being transformed in the age of AI and robotics. Hey, Pavitra, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Before we get into the actual segment, I want to ask you both, what was your last Amazon purchase?
Oh, God. This is not going to be interesting. I think diapers.
That is true. I'm sure that's 90% of what you order right now, if not more. It's just baby stuff.
Yep. I had an order come in today. It's just all baby stuff. So I'm like, this is such a boring answer.
Do you guys know what Folex is? I think it's called Folex. It's a instant carpet spot remover.
Ooh.
This is how you know you're in your 30s or 40s, by the way, is when your Amazon purchases revolve around
cleaning
supplies. Yeah, but I gotta tell you, it's like set it and forget it. You spray it and slay it. Because
I need to get
you put one little drop of this thing on even red wine on a carpet and it's gone.
Ooh.
That's nice. I do need that.
I need
that. And I get a lot of, they just ruin everything.
Folex, man.
The amount of times my dogs have just outright like knocked a plate of food out of my hands onto the floor, onto the couch is ridiculous.
Wait, what kind of dogs do you have?
I have 2 Boston Terriers and then a Yorkie mix.
Oh, you have 3 dogs.
I have
my
3 dogs.
Damn.
2 bedrooms, 3 dogs.
In NYC.
Yeah,
Outnumbered.
this is not a good idea.
No, I think it's the best idea.
No, it's great. I love them.
That's awesome.
More than anything. They're super sweet. My last Amazon order was a pair of shoes. It was a pair of Adidas. So that's fairly interesting. I think Bryan wins for the most interesting new order, mostly because
or I just have the messiest apartment that needs constant stain.
That's also true. That's probably the best case
spilling
scenario.
stuff constantly.
Okay, so we're talking about Amazon and their shift to more robotics in their warehouses. We actually did a segment about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now, where Yaz and I went to an Amazon fulfillment center in Delaware as they were starting to roll out some of their new robotics there. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think the premise of this story very much undermines the messaging that we were getting the whole time we were there. They sent one of their like HR executives to tour us through, and he was glad handing all the workers. It was very much like, we care about our workers, where robotics means more jobs for people as it's coming along. And I think we were all kind of like, yeah, that's a little bit of bullshit. Like, we know how Amazon functions, particularly with their union busting practices. But it's been 2 years since that time. So Pavitra, give us the picture of what an Amazon warehouse looks like now and how much the robots have taken over.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious what kind of warehouse you saw, because I think it sort of depends on what warehouse you're talking about. I think most of them are using robots in some capacity now, but it does depend on whether they've been sort of upgraded or they're very new and they're one of the warehouses that they likely showed off to you, like one of the very automated ones. So as of last year, there are now over 1 million robots operating in Amazon warehouses, which is pretty remarkable because that's nearly as many robots as human workers. So just take that in. And a recent New York Times report indicates that their goal is actually to eventually automate about 75% of the company's operations, and specifically to replace about 500,000 workers with robots. And by that, I mean they'll be able to hire fewer workers because they're adopting robots pretty aggressively. So it's a tricky thing because they're not necessarily cutting jobs so much as removing those future jobs, or like being able to hire less than they would otherwise. Now, Amazon has described this report as misleading and told me that it didn't accurately reflect their hiring plans, but that was a pretty big headline from a few months ago. So a worker described to me what this actually kind of looks like in one of Amazon's most automated warehouses in North Carolina. There are multiple floors that are largely dedicated to robots. On one floor, there's what they call their stow system. So it's this like sprawling robotic system that specializes in stowing items, which means like picking up an item and just making space for it in a storage bin, which is surprisingly difficult for a robot. The human workers have to kind of stay on the perimeter of that floor. There's another floor that has very few human workers other than the robotics technicians who maintain and kind of fix these robots. And then I would say on like the first few floors where there are more human workers, there are like hallways that are designated for robots. And those are usually marked with red tape. And then there's green tape in the areas where humans can walk.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
They did have the tape system in the Delaware one when we went to. And I remember there was this one section that was like, it had to be like the size of a football field. It's just different like refrigerator size little robots zipping around and bringing different items to workers to then take and out,
That makes it feel so real to see like this like color coded system. Like, you can't go in here because you might get run over by a robot.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, but it also felt like kind of like weird and cheap, because it's literally it looked like, I'm a theater kid. I've said this a billion times on the podcast. When you're doing a show and you're rehearsing, you tape out the set on the floor. It felt like that a little bit because it was just literal red tape.
They have to block out their movements.
Honestly, it is very choreographed.
Formation, I danced for years, so I'm thinking of like stage mark.
Yeah.
Learning all kinds of things on this podcast.
We can't go down this path right now, but there's a lot there. But yeah, we'd have like formation marking on the stage. Yeah. But I wonder if you saw this. It sounds like the workers interact with the robots and like talk to them like they're colleagues, which is really
Yeah.
interesting,
Yeah,
a
quite a
little
bit.
strange. But yeah, it
The
sounds
talking to is funny. That was a funny nugget in your story.
like
where
joking around
Do
with
they
the
talk back?
robots. Well, good question. No, I don't think so. They sing.
They're not like humanoid robots.
Yeah.
They're like an arm of the thing,
Yes.
like it's like Roombas and arms is
Yeah.
essentially what it seems like.
I think they do make noise. Like they seem to play music or like sing in some way to
Is it
kind
sort of like an
denote-
R2D2 sort of
God.
situation?
quite that, or if it's literally just to tell workers like, oh, there's a robot here coming, so like
Yeah.
get out of the way. That seems
Yeah.
to be what they use the music for.
So what are the actual jobs that they are doing? I think they have a few different models with very grandiose names.
Yeah. They have some very funny names.
Pegasus. Yeah.
Hercules. Yeah. So there's a few different types. This kind of dates back to an acquisition in 2012 where Amazon bought this company called Kiva. And those robots were effectively, I think the ones that you described earlier, where they're like little Roomba-esque
Yeah.
robots, and they move these shelves around these huge warehouse spaces. So there are those types of robots, and there's like different variations on that. And those are essentially just meant to cut back on the amount of time that workers are like walking across these warehouses and also just carrying really heavy items.
Yeah.
And then there's the robotic arms that I think a lot of people have seen, like the funky little arm robots.
Little suction things. and
Yeah,
they go-
yeah. And there's a lot of different variations on that as well. I think typically they use a camera to kind of figure out which item they're trying to pick up, but those are what the company uses to, sort items. So like the stow machine that I described earlier uses that kind of a robotic arm. And then you'll also see some of these other, not quite Roomba type robots, but they basically are just moving like packed orders around. So I
Right.
think that is Pegasus, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, those are the main robots, I would say. There is also a newer one that they have talked about quite a bit, the Sequoia system. That includes the stowing machine, where, again, what they're doing there is kind of interesting and different because they are actually using, like, I don't know how to describe it exactly, like almost like a forcep, but the robot is able to like get into a shelf and like pick up an item, not using a camera or like an imaging system, which is
Right.
a little different. And then they're able to kind of stow the item in a shelf where there's other items in there and they have to like make room for this new item. So it's actually like surprisingly complicated to do because
Yeah.
they have to move other items around to make space. And yeah, Amazon has talked a lot about that because it is actually like an interesting new robotic system.
Because
Yeah,
it is hard
yeah.
for robots in general. Like they always talk about like dexterity and
Yes.
like, very sort of like motor skills specific, like hyper specialized movements is really hard. But it sounds like they're making headway.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's still really challenging for a robot to do what we can do very easily. So there's this weird paradox where like it's hard to get your head around what robots can't do because there's so many things they can do that we cannot do or they
Yeah.
can do better than us. Like playing chess is a great example. And so I think people don't understand that something that's super easy for us to do, like fishing around for our keys in our purse or
Yeah.
like picking up a glass or folding laundry, that's actually really difficult for a robot to do. So there's a lot that they still can't manage easily. And because of that, like these jobs are not going to be entirely automated just yet. It was funny. I was watching my 10-month-old baby like rummaging through a basket of toys trying to find something. And I was like, oh, robots can't do what he can.
Well, that does bring up kind of an interesting philosophical point that I think I've brought up a number of times in this podcast in terms of how we measure the ability of robots or Gen AI in particular as replacements of what humans can do. And I just think it's not necessarily informative to think of technology in solely those terms. Like there's obviously going to be some overlap of categories that like we should expect robotics or Gen AI to do a better, quicker job at certain human tasks. But then we should also be expecting them to do things that we could never do in a very specific way. I'm thinking about with any sort of machinery in terms of like lifting incredibly and
Yep.
moving incredibly heavy things quick and fast that humans just won't do. And then it's not that big of a disappointment, or it's not actually like a point against these technologies to be like, well, I have these fine motor skills. And it's like, does it necessarily need to have those skills? Is that necessary to its value? And it's usually not.
Yeah.
But then the other thing with Amazon, that is sort of a tricky thing. I think a lot of people, there's a, very much a heightened mistrust of technology. And we've set this up at the beginning of like, this will impact employment. But the other thing that's a major problem for Amazon is the working conditions for people. And this certainly creates new challenges for that, but also repetitive stress injuries, things like bending and lowering yourself and lifting heavy things and carrying them long distances are major things that workers don't want to be doing and is deteriorating for human health. So there is a desire to have these robotics programs to help with those things. I think one thing that one of like the stowing machines or something like that helps do is like when a worker is looking to pack something that is, in one of these shelves, it'll raise that item to a level where you don't have to bend down and crouch and reach and do stuff that can create over time repetitive stress injuries.
Yeah.
So the other big thing that Amazon is pushing, I think you mentioned that they described that New York Times report as inaccurate. Something that they're pushing is the idea of upskilling workers, that there's going to be more opportunity with robotics coming in. And they have these training programs to learn how to become essentially like a robot technician. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying, I think the whole argument here is this is going to mitigate some of those challenges with the job, make it safer, make it less sort of painful. Like these are really difficult jobs for workers, and repetitive stress injury is a huge problem for Amazon warehouse workers. And so I think their whole argument has been we are going to automate those parts of the job and make these jobs better and more lucrative and desirable for workers. I think this is kind of the big question, though, right? Because it's hard to say whether or not there will actually be equal or even greater opportunities for these workers if they are automating a lot of the job. I think, they point to certain training programs for workers who are interested in working more closely with robots and like maintaining and fixing them. You were talking about the robotics technician jobs, but it's not clear how many workers are actually benefiting from those opportunities or actually doing those upskilling programs. And I think that's the real issue, right? I think the reality is these new jobs with workers largely maintaining and fixing these robots will be better in some ways and will probably have higher pay. But there's just no way to actually transition like the vast number of workers they have in these warehouses into those better jobs because they just won't need as many people for those jobs. And then the other thing is just, and I think you alluded to this earlier, there's a shocking amount of turnover in these warehouses. Like they very much rely on this model of just constantly hiring new people on like a seasonal and temporary basis. And Amazon is kind of known for hiring externally rather than really creating like pathways for promotion and other opportunities for these warehouse workers to move up within the company. Multiple workers told me that it's like really difficult to move up if you're hired into a warehouse worker role. And so I think it's hard to say, whether or not there are really going to be all of these amazing opportunities for workers to kind of move into these robotics technician roles. And I also think it puts a lot of the onus on the worker to actually pursue that.
And I believe that Amazon's the second largest employer in the U.S. after Walmart, I believe. And a lot of that growth has come in the last 5, 6, 7 years. Can you talk a little bit just about the scope of employment that we're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, as you said, I think this is why it kind of matters what Amazon does, right? Because they are such a humongous employer. I mean, I think the idea of an Amazon warehouse job as like this huge, both sort of driver of economic growth in parts of the country where there maybe are not so many jobs, also just like the sheer number of jobs that they've created in those areas. I think as difficult as these jobs are, they've also just provided a lot of opportunity to a lot of different types of workers. So I think there's no kind of denying that Amazon has created a lot of jobs, has fueled a lot of economic growth, especially in certain parts of the country. But I think because of all of that, it also matters what they do in these warehouses and whether they cut back on these jobs. And I think they're very much like leaders in this space. Obviously Walmart, UPS, like these other companies are doing similar things and are trying to automate their warehouses. But as the second largest employer, as you said, I think what Amazon does really does matter and will kind of set the tone for all of these other companies and warehouses.
Generally, warehouse competitors that are shipping a lot of products even talking about like the USPS or stuff like that. Do we see robots being used pretty much across the board? Is Amazon really kind of out ahead of the pack and other companies are trying to catch up with this? What's the sort of competitive landscape there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Amazon is absolutely kind of ahead of the curve. They, as I said, acquired this company back in 2012, and I think you can sort of see how that has played out. But its competitors are still heavily investing in automation. I think it's just maybe not quite as sophisticated as what Amazon is doing. So about 60% of Walmart stores now receive their supply from automated distribution centers, and more than half of the company's volume across fulfillment centers moves through automated systems of some kind. So that might look like autonomous forklifts or these sensors that enable the company to monitor inventory in real time. And then UPS, I'm sure many people have heard of the number of jobs they've been cutting over the last year or so, and very much citing automation in doing so. And they've been investing something like $9 billion in automation across the company. And about $120 million has been earmarked for robots that will help unload trucks. So we're seeing other types of automation happening at Amazon's competitors, but I do think it's safe to say that like the sheer sort of scale of Amazon's robotics push and the types of robots that they're implementing, like they are certainly ahead of the pack in that regard.
So you've mentioned this a little bit, but I'd love to hear more about what workers are saying about this shift to robotics.
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely report that there has been an increase in the type of tasks that are being automated. You know, having spoken to both workers and also advocates who are themselves speaking to a lot of workers and visiting these warehouses, there is a shift in the kinds of tasks and functions that these robots are taking on, so things that were previously performed by humans. That being said, at this stage, in many of these warehouses, even the more advanced ones, they're still sort of integrating these robots.
Right.
Like humans are very much working alongside them and training these robots. But there are these pain points that, you know, arise as people are learning to work with robots. Some people have reported that their job just feels more menial and just kind of boring at times because these robots are doing the vast majority of their job now, and they're just sort of sitting there watching the robot and making sure they kind of fix it as needed if it stops working. Another worker and also organizer in North Carolina had mentioned that, you know, the work culture has definitely shifted a little bit and that workers just have to be way more aware of their surroundings and, you know, watch where they're going and make sure they're not in the red area of the hallway. And I think all of this sort of points to just, I don't know, this kind of growing pains and this sort of shift as you get used to working alongside all of these workers. Another part of this is just like, how much training is Amazon doing even for these workers that are not necessarily taking on like technician positions, but are just learning to work with new robots? And it does sound, at least based on one employee's report, that there is just minimal training for a lot of average workers. He actually described the training as slideshows with AI-generated voiceovers, which I thought was interesting.
There's something kind of poetic about
yes,
that.
There really is. And so, you know, these robots might need maintenance, or they may enter a room too quickly, or maybe they are responsible for tracking productivity metrics like time off task, which is a very big one that Amazon uses to kind of monitor its workers on the job. So they're now like tasking robots with doing some of that surveillance and monitoring, which is interesting. So yeah, so there's a lot of different areas, I think, where the company is kind of slowly introducing more automation. And for these workers, like they're effectively partnering with these robots now. One worker mentioned that you're kind of responsible for whether the robot executes properly when you're partnering with them. And so if that robot takes too long to do something, then that's kind of on you. So yeah, so I think
crazy.
I know it's really
I mean, particularly with obviously you just mentioned the time off task or like the productivity metrics. I think there was a lot of the stories back in the day of like your bathroom breaks and your all that sort of stuff. If your employment, your compensation is based on now how effective these robots are at parts of your job that you used to do, maybe it does them faster, but I'm sure they're not going to. The benchmarks change. It's sort of a weird taking things out
And how
of
do they
control
even
of
know like what to
workers.
look for? I mean, is it just like, okay, the robot literally stops working? I mean, these people aren't necessarily like trained roboticists, right?
Yeah, I
Right,
mean, that's
exactly.
the problem you were just mentioning, Pavitra. I'm sure just knowing how Amazon operates, you got to get those same day deliveries out. They're all about efficiency, like psychotically focused on customer experience, taking time to properly train workers may cut into that delivery time. What are you going to do? Shut down a warehouse so you can do a big, long training day for everyone, or let alone more than that? They're not going to do that. You got to kind of learn on the fly.
Yeah. So
What could go wrong?
I know, right? So it does seem like there's certainly a part of it that is about learning on the job. And then the other thing I didn't mention is just that there are these types of jobs that, as we've been saying, it's not the worst thing to automate certain kinds of jobs, right? If it requires sort of carrying heavy things, any sort of action that might cause repetitive stress injuries. So one example of that is just the person who's kind of monitoring the dock doors and dealing with getting these packages out of the warehouses. That's the kind of job that historically has been done by a human, but has slowly become more automated. Someone I spoke to who had previously been doing that job was saying another shift he's seen is just that there are now way fewer people they need for that kind of work. It's largely been automated. And while that is probably bound to happen as they introduce more and more automation, the flip side is you now have like one human worker who's overseeing many different dock doors. And so the job changes, and I think there's obviously some potential repercussions when that happens. But it's interesting to hear about the types of jobs that are maybe just going to kind of fall by the wayside and not really be held by humans anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the broad, like the zoom out sort of conversation always with this is, well, jobs go away. Certain job categories no longer exist. And in like a vacuum, the idea of like creative destruction and us like automating particular jobs that are dangerous, that are, lead to adverse health outcomes over time, are low paying and menial or repetitive, like, on one hand, it's good that those jobs can be taken away because having someone do that is of a detriment to that person necessarily. But we live in a world where you lose your job at Amazon, you're not necessarily going to be employed, and we need employment and we need all of those things. So it's that like tough conversation of like, okay, hyper efficiency at Amazon would be fine if we had like a federal jobs guarantee or UBI and a more robust social safety net that allowed people to lose a job and still have health care, still have at least temporary income, and can then pursue something that they want to do. It'd be great if everyone could follow their dreams, but that's not the world we live in. And like you said, Amazon, second largest employer, and this is also something that Walmart's doing, first largest employer, and a bunch of other huge employers. This is a massive amount of people, or a massive, like, relative to growth amount of people or job categories or headcounts that are going to be lost over time. And how does the economy account for that? How does the job market react to that?
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't do anything for wages or unionization at Amazon, let alone a bunch of other issues.
Yeah. And I think organizers and worker advocates they're aware that this is where things are headed, and that nobody's trying to sort of curb automation in this way. But I think they just feel as though if other warehouses are also going to kind of follow suit, like, where do these workers go? And that was kind of the question I had when I started writing this, was just, as these jobs are changing, as other companies are kind of trying to keep up with Amazon and push automation, where do workers go who historically were able to get these kinds of jobs, but now will need upskilling or will need to train in some way to get these sort of new robotics technician jobs. So I think part of that is just working with local and state governments and figuring out, like, are there ways to upskill workers? Are there ways to kind of scale what companies like Amazon are doing on a smaller scale? I don't know, but I think it's going to be a really significant shift. And, there's probably more that we could be doing to prepare for that.
But will we? Probably not.
Who knows?
All right, that's a good place to leave it. I guess as good a place as any to leave it. We'll be back with Pavithra for keeping tabs, but first a quick break, followed by Bryan's interview with TED CEO Logan McClure Davda. Welcome to my TED Talk. Sorry, I meant Welcome to the
Oh.
episode of MIC where Bryan talks to TED's CEO, Logan McClure Davda. Was that good? That was a walk of a joke.
You know what? I need a diagram for that. But I got there in the end with you.
Yeah, so no, it's welcome to my TED Talk.
Yeah.
But actually, it's not my TED Talk
all of
at
our
all.
TED Talks.
You see, the best jokes are the ones you need to explain. Well, anyways, we're talking about TED today. Bryan interviewed CEO Logan McClure Davda. So the 40-year-old nonprofit known for its signature events and podcasts like the TED Radio Hour and Work Life with Adam Grant is in a period of change. They explored the possibility of being acquired. They contemplated switching from a nonprofit to a for-profit business, but ultimately landed on introducing a new generation of leadership to revitalize the brand. This included bringing on Sal Khan as Vision Steward. If you're wondering what Vision Steward means, stay tuned. You're going to hear all about that. And elevating Davda to CEO, a role she's now held for 8 months. And Davda's also been on and off with the brand. I think she was an intern with the company at some point, or was like just out of college, started with TED, which is crazy. A lot of brand knowledge there.
Yeah.
Bryan sat down with Davda to talk about how TED is finding its place and its community in the world of limited attention span, all-consuming social media, and of course, AI. Here's that conversation.
Logan, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Bryan.
For braving the gross, rainy, cold New York weather.
I was raised to love rain. My mom loves it, so life's more fun when you enjoy shitty weather.
There you go. We're aligned on that. So, TED. There's 3 little letters that I think if you have spent any time on the internet in the last 10, 15 years, unless you've been living on a rock, you have seen many a TED Talk, right? I feel like TED is something that is so embedded in the internet, and I think that it has provided us so many opportunities to hear amazing stories from amazing experts, amazing people. But I feel like, and we talked about this the other day, you go on LinkedIn for 30 seconds, and that's all the amount of time it takes before you see people with paragraphs long diatribes where everyone considers themselves a thought leader, right? And it's funny because it's like, it's even become a thing where people on social media will maybe say something, they'll pontificate on who knows what, and then they'll end it with, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
The memification of the TED Talk.
Yeah, and so I'm curious, before we get into what's new with TED and sort of the mission and what TED looks like in 2026, I would love to talk about this fact that everybody kind of fancies themselves a thought leader now. How is TED still relevant? I would love to know, because especially, if you look at some search data, apparently peak TED Talk happened in 2017 in terms of like people searching for TED Talk online and stuff. Plus the fact that I feel like the world is so much more divided. Media consumption is so fragmented.
Yeah.
And again, everyone has an opinion, and there's no shortage of platforms to share those opinions. How does TED fit into that in this current landscape?
Such a good question, and something we're kind of constantly grappling with. I would say when I stepped into the CEO role a couple of months ago, everyone was asking me what it felt like. And in many ways, the role and the organization and our work has never felt more urgent and important, right? As you mentioned, with kind of the rampant misinformation on the internet, the kind of inability to find credible, insightful, interesting, often surprising content. It's hard to do just because each one of us is being bombarded at any moment. And then the flip side is also true. The media landscape has entirely changed. And so we're really asking ourselves not just kind of how to be relevant in this moment, but how can we most meaningfully contribute to this moment? I think a huge part of this next chapter will be continuing to lean into what we're great at and raising the bar for our curatorial standards, right? Yes, of course, so many people think of themselves as thought leaders, and so many of those people can't deliver a really compelling, concrete idea in TED Talk form or other form. So part of, I think, our responsibility is to kind of double down on the curatorial rigor, if you will, and really continuing to think creatively and expansively around what ideas need to be shared with the world and when. then the kind of flip side is also true. We need to innovate. We've been innovating on the kind of media side of the house for many years. I mean, most people actually just mostly know us for the TED Talk, but actually one of our most successful formats is the TED Ed animation. It's much shorter. It's all animated in collaboration with expert animators around the world. And they're kind of brilliant, creative explainers, often aimed at a younger audience, but they're consumed by all ages. And each one of those kind of goes viral instantaneously because of how they deliver what the audience wants at any given moment. I think similarly, podcasts. We were super early in podcasts. I mean, TED Talks Daily, TED Radio Hour. And so we're excited to think about what's next. And then maybe I'd also add that virality is, I think, in many ways no longer what any of us are aiming for. I mean, you kind of see it in many of the thought pieces that you mentioned, but I think everyone's really asking themselves, what does successful media look like in this moment? That's a huge part of this next chapter for us, is thinking about depth and engagement over just breadth. I mean, there's definitely an important role for the kind of reach and breadth play, but how do we kind of move ourselves into deeper relationships with our audiences?
How does TED fit into that? You're talking about the media landscape. I feel like everything is sort of short form, vertical video, whereas TED obviously is the grandeur of being on the stage, right, and, having the audience, which is something that obviously you can't get, certainly if you're there in person as an audience member, but even as a viewer on a device. Could you talk a little bit about just sort of how the TED format can stay relevant in this landscape as well?
Yeah, totally. Part of it is just being on different platforms. And so being on social and other ways and thinking about not just what are the ways to share snippets of talks and existing formats on other channels, but social first ways to share brilliant humans and important ideas. And so the team has been doing a lot of that work to a great success. And truthfully, kind of the audience, there's different flavors of our audience across different platforms. And then thinking a lot in this moment about entirely new formats. I mean, right, YouTube is where most of our content is consumed, YouTube and audio. And the algorithm around our content does prioritize that kind of traditional talk-based format with an audience. And so part of the work this year is to actually think about what else is our audience excited about, and how do we share that in very different ways, both in length and whether it's out in the field, in studio, other things. So excited to bring some of that to the table later this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you started as CEO just a few months ago, right? Could you talk a little bit about just sort of the update in terms of the leadership changes at
what
TED?
The heck happened?
Yeah, if you could just sort of take us through, because there was, change of leadership. Is TED going to stay a nonprofit kind of a thing? Could you kind of just slow it down for folks and kind of bring us up to speed with the recent history of the company?
Of course. So TED was founded over 40 years ago by a gentleman named Richard Saul Warman in the 80s. It was not a nonprofit at the time. It was purchased by Chris Anderson, a publishing executive from the UK, in 2001. And he turned it into a nonprofit and then actually turned TED into what we all know it is today. Started publishing TED Talks, the launch of TEDx and other things to further democratize the brand, all under a kind of nonprofit legal structure. He did something pretty crazy and I think very admirable last year, which is to say he'd been running the organization for the last 25 years, the last 5 of which he was doing that in partnership with our CEO. So he was kind of in a chairman role for the last 5 years, and Jay Haradi has been the CEO. And Chris said, as we think about kind of what TED needs to be and how TED can most meaningfully contribute to the world in the next 25 years, he said, I probably am not the right person to shepherd this organization into this next chapter. And so he did an open call to the world to say who has kind of vision and capital to bring to the table to supercharge the next chapter. And we did. We partnered with an investment bank and received over 100 proposals. And we were considering everything. We had proposals from the expected media companies to singular philanthropists who wanted to step into a role similar to Chris's, to kind of coalitions of organizations bringing different sets of expertise together and proposing turning TED into a B Corp. Because some parts of our business operate more similarly to a for-profit entity. And we met amazing people along that journey, and we chose our own path. In the many conversations that Chris and Jay and I were having with external parties, actually Sal Khan, who's a friend of ours and a good friend of Chris's, said to Chris, it would be a real shame if the kind of public lost this entity. And so would you consider keeping it a nonprofit, and what would that entail? And so kind of unknowingly, Sal ended up signing himself up to be what we call kind of vision steward in this next chapter. And so what we did was we essentially said thank you, but no to the proposals on the table and charted our own path, which is we chose to remain a nonprofit. We've added Sal Khan to the board of the TED Foundation as vision steward. So really, he's staying on as CEO at Khan Academy and really kind of setting, in many ways, the kind of moral compass. He's the moral
Khan
compass.
Academy is
An incredible education organization based in California. For those of you who don't know, their mission is world-class education free for the world. And he's really been a pioneer both in the traditional ed space, but also thinking about how, in many ways, it's very technology-based and just supercharged that. And he's done all of that under a nonprofit banner and been incredibly successful. And so Sal has joined the board as vision steward, a made-up title, but one we're excited about.
Here at Fast Company, we always talk about leadership and new approaches to leadership. And what does vision steward actually mean?
So Sal always was going to stay on as CEO at Khan Academy. He wasn't going to come over and be CEO at TED. It was really about his vision for what TED could contribute to the world over these next 25 years. And so that was really more in a board member-like capacity. In many ways similar to what Chris had been doing for the last 5 years alongside Jay as CEO. But in order for that to really work, we needed to also think about what the kind of leadership inside the entity would be. And that's where Chris and team asked me to step in as CEO, kind of alongside Sal. And in many ways, it's kind of handing TED to the next generation, because Sal and I are both a generation younger than Chris and Jay. And I think we bring a really unique mix of insider TED knowledge. I've been in the TED ecosystem actually since I graduated college. It was my first job out of college.
Oh, wow.
Started and ran the fellows program and then left and did other things and came back 7 years ago as head of impact. And so it's, I think, a really neat combination of the two of us leading TED into the next chapter.
I'd love to rewind a little bit. Could you talk a bit more about the sort of curatorial standard that TED has when you guys, I guess, could you walk us through, how does creating a TED Talk work? How do you pick the person? How do you sign off on the idea? How do you try to stay timely and relevant, et cetera?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, it's such a good question, and definitely more of an art than a science. So there isn't a kind of cookie cutter approach to every talk. But I would say what's really important to us in this moment, and then I'll talk through the process as you asked, what's really important to us in this moment is to hold the complexity of the world and the nuance and to have a really big tent. People come to us on a regular basis in this moment in particular, and obviously moments in the past, and say kind of which side are you picking? And what's important for us is actually...
What do you mean by that? Which side are you
which
picking?
side are you picking politically or otherwise? I think so much of the world continues to just become more and more polarized. And each issue, I think we as a species are having a harder time holding the complexity and the nuance around so many of these issues, and oftentimes separating really important ideas from humans. We're equating the two, and every single thing a person has done or stood for or said is reflected on, they evaluate the validity of an idea based on the entire history of a human sharing that idea. And in reality, that's not how the world works. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we as people may disagree, and I could still learn something from you. Mm-hmm. There might be some things we agree on. When I say kind of big tent and holding the nuance and the complexity, that's a real muscle that it's really important for us to continue to strengthen, and a space that kind of we're, I think, strongly holding that middle ground in many ways, because there are really important ideas to be shared from a variety of humans and perspectives. So I just give you that context up front. But in terms of how we do it, we have an incredible team of curators led by Helen Walters, many of whom have journalistic backgrounds. And so they kind of come at, they love to know what's happening in the world and love to kind of pick and poke and prod at different ideas that brilliant humans might have or want to share. Some ideas are like almost emergent from a person, and it's very obvious what they would be giving a TED Talk on. Some we work with them for years to figure out like what the right talk is. I think for people who haven't watched a lot of TED Talks, I think one of the big differentiators is they really are like almost singular idea-based, if that makes sense. Oftentimes people approach giving an important talk with having to share every great idea you've ever had and really honing in on the one thing you want the audience to walk away with. And the team works really closely with each of the speakers, regardless of how prominent or how great you are at public speaking prior to starting to work with us. We work with them to help develop the talk. And it's really important that it's in their voice and it's their talk and idea, but we want to support them in delivering the best thing possible. And that's both in helping to react to scripts along the way. And then also we have an incredible speaker coaching team led by Bryan Goldberg. And she is just a master at giving people kind of tips and tricks. Because again, for people who haven't been to a TED conference, there's no teleprompter, there's no notes that secretly you just don't see on screen. They've worked their buns off to deliver that talk in such a compelling way, really by knowing it so well.
Could you talk a little bit more about this idea of how do you get an average viewer to engage with TED's content? Like, for example, I'm sure many people would love to go to a TED Talk, and media companies, certainly events is a very strong revenue stream. But, a typical TED Talk ticket could be thousands of dollars depending on the tier. How do you harmonize that? And certainly not everybody would, maybe have the availability to go to a TED Talk, but even just like breaking through the noise of people just getting on social media and consuming big changing ideas in other ways, like someone in their, living room just whipping out their phone.
Yeah.
What's driving people to go to a TED Talk, especially since they're sort of longer form?
Yeah.
And I feel like all our brains are so broken at this point, we just want to consume things that are like 1 millisecond long.
Totally. It's so funny when we all talk about TED being so long because it, started as 18 minutes. Now most are probably average 12-ish in the long side. But it's so funny because when we started putting these online, everyone's like, this is such a short format. Like I can only deliver things in because they were used to lectures, right? But obviously the media landscape, as you point out, has dramatically changed. I would answer that question in multiple ways. I mean, one is the democratization of the experience is one way to answer the question. And I think that's actually a big part of the next chapter. When we spoke last week, I was telling you a little bit about, as I stepped into the CEO role, it was really important for me to do some deep strategy work with the team to say kind of who are we and how do we want to contribute to the world over the next 3 years? And maybe most importantly, what does the world need most from us in this moment? There's different paths we could have taken, but where we really landed is doubling down on human connection. Obviously, the curatorial rigor that we spoke about earlier is a core part of who we are, but the magic really happens when ideas are consumed in community. We know that we believe, I should say, that ideas land more deeply in people and spread more quickly and farther when they're consumed in community. And that's kind of a core belief and drives a lot of what we do. And so what does that mean for what we are doing as an organization over the next 3 years? I mean, if you have kind of the flagship conferences, which are incredibly expensive for now, if you talk about the next tier as the incredible TEDx events that are taking place around the world. I mean, last year we had 4,500 independently organized events that really range in size and scale. But what is more accessible, kind of lower barrier to entry way for people to connect with one another over ideas? And so that's a big part of how we're thinking about this next chapter, which I'm really excited to be cooking up with the team.
Going back to the idea of the main event is prohibitively expensive for most people, but could you talk a little bit more about TEDx, right? Like, I feel like this is something that pops up a lot on my feed, like, or on YouTube or something. Oh, there's like more local TEDx talks. Like, how does that fit into the current landscape in terms of sort of the democratization that we were talking about earlier?
Such a good question. And I think another great example of a risk that Chris took, truthfully, a brilliant risk he took, was kind of opening the brand. It was back in 2009. And he said, like, what if we just gave away the brand and let anyone host these events? There was a real concern at the time that that would devalue what TED was and what giving a TED Talk was. But truthfully, what has come from that is so much more valuable, I think, to the world and to us than any devaluing. I mean, we shouldn't be the only arbiters of great ideas out in the world. There are incredible leaders and communities who know their leaders and communities better than we do. And so giving them the ability to uplift speakers and ideas, humans, et cetera, to share their ideas with the world has been incredible. So the way TEDx works, all TEDx events are independently organized. So individuals apply for a license from us, and they're committing to a small set of things when they take on that license. All of the names of TEDx events are location-based. So you'll notice like some have a city name or a community name or, I don't know, the name of a local bridge.
A bridge?
To differentiate. I'm trying to think of one.
TEDx Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah, exactly.
TEDx Golden Gate.
Yeah, the exact 100%. They're probably both of those TEDx's exist, and I should know that. But so it's
TEDx
something.
Tappan Zee, although I know that's not the name of it anymore.
Yeah, but there you go. You get the vibe. It has to be location-based as opposed to thematic. And then there's different tiers of TEDx events. There's a bunch of resources and trainings that those organizers go through, and they host their own events. And one of the things they're committing to when they receive a license is to record all of the talks and to upload those to the TEDx YouTube channel. And then the team is reviewing those talks to make sure that there are kind of no real violations, no pseudoscience, no selling from the stage, that kind of thing. And if we do see that, there are then repercussions. Those talks are removed. Their license may not be renewed, that kind of thing. And what's been incredible about it is they happen at just
There's a TED license.
It's a TEDx license.
TEDx,
You're essentially you go online and you apply. You say, I want to host a TEDx event in my community.
Oh, I see.
And you get that license. It's free, and you're committing to a set of rules. And then it's entirely independently organized. And what's so amazing is the breadth of events that have taken place. I mean, some in slums in Kibera in Nairobi, Kenya, to huge mountainsides with tens of thousands of people. And some are bigger scale, have more attendees than flagship conference in Vancouver. You know, the idea is that we then pick a subset of the talks that are featured on the TEDx channel to then feature on the TED channels. And some of the speakers that you know and love, we discovered through TEDx. Brene Brown is a great example. So she actually delivered her first talk on vulnerability at a TEDx event, and then she gave subsequent talks at the flagship conference.
Working her way up.
Yeah.
You know, I started watching TED like maybe back in 2008, like when I graduated from college, and obviously the world was an extremely different place.
Yeah.
And I just remember at the time thinking like, oh, wow, this is so interesting and insightful and enlightening. And the context of the world was such that like, oh, like that's like something to chew on. That's really interesting.
It's like we had more time to
versus,
consume and reflect.
Yeah, whereas today is like systems are collapsing all around us. Like I just feel like collectively everything just feels like we're just sort of careening off the rails and who knows what's going to happen next. What is TED's role in that insofar as, you know, you mentioned these pillars of community building and spreading big ideas and curatorial rigor.
Yeah.
How do you guys fit into that space when I feel like the context in which people are consuming this content is so chaotic?
And dire in many ways. I mean, it's kind of what we're thinking about on a day-to-day basis. I mean, one of the things with Sal coming in as Vision Steward that we've been talking a lot about, two of the big challenges that we think we can contribute to are the kind of growing social isolation that we were just speaking about. And I think we have a real role to play, and I think an ability to have a greater impact than many because of our distributed global network if we continue to expand on that. And then the second is we'd be remiss to not talk about AI and the upcoming or here dislocation of humans from jobs and everything else. And so one of the things as Sal has been stepping into this role, and obviously with his kind of more traditional ed hat on, has been to ask, what could TED and Khan Academy and others, if we came together, how could we help contribute to that problem? And so we are in some really exciting conversations to hopefully really contribute to kind of higher ed job placement, really more tactical, tangible part of some of that kind of change, that very urgent change that people are either experiencing or about to experience. So more to come on that, but really excited about the conversations underway. I'd also say that I think people often talk about our content or stuff as like, oh, an inspiring TED Talk, because they're thinking about one specific talk or something. And in many ways, I think of our role as helping people navigate complexity, right? If we can give people either information or tools to live in the messy moment we are in, that feels really important. It's hard work, but it feels really important to lean into that hard work.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us today,
Oh,
Logan.
Thank you, Bryan.
Now, if I were you, every time I would finish an interview, I would end it with, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
That's what I got to do.
This is really just teeing you up
Okay.
here.
Thank you
but
for coming to my TED Talk, Bryan.
There it is. Thank you.
Okay, we're back with Pavithra, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each one of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we're following right now, business or otherwise. Pavithra, since you're our guest, what are you keeping tabs on?
I am keeping tabs on the toilet troubles on the Artemis mission. Things are going so well here on Earth that, I had to look to space for some intrigue.
No problems down here.
No.
Let's look to the stars.
Totally fine. I really enjoyed the description of the odors in particular that were caused by this malfunctioning
The worst
toilet.
nightmare.
Airtight environment.
Yeah. I mean, it sounded very cool, but it is funny to me that this toilet broke down within days of this mission starting.
Wait, hold on. So wait, because I'm not up to speed. Tell me what happened.
Basically, it's rather complicated. It involves frozen urine and things there not being enough water in the toilet. But essentially, the toilet stopped working and it would only accept solid waste and not urine.
Wait, we gotta slow this way down. So frozen urine.
Yes.
Walk me
I
through-
think, jamming the toilet? As far as
How did it get?
remember.
Did they freeze it? How do you pee in space? Do you pee then freeze then flush?
So, I mean, historically, they weren't really able to use a toilet in space. So this is a really cool thing because they actually created a toilet that works.
Oh my God.
And I think it's similar to what's on the International Space Station. But yeah, apparently it stopped working. It was not able to,
how
process
soon
the urine.
was it? Right out of the gate? Oh God, the
I think it
toilet's
was
not
within a
working?
few days.
And how long are they going to be up there?
We were there for 10 days, or they're going.
I can't
I think they're-
remember
I think something like that.
exactly. It's
10?
fairly short.
Yeah.
I want to say it was quite short. Yeah. But yes, this is just another reason why I don't have the mental fortitude for space.
You
Yeah.
cannot pee. I would never go into
Don't have the
space.
mental
Couldn't be me.
fortitude for space or for a carnival
for-
cruise.
Oh my God. That too.
Honestly, true. I mean, Carnival, their social medias should have been on it and been like, see, it's not that easy, everybody. Be like, y'all, Carnival, they're going to space.
Toilets.
Well, yeah, that's a,
So wait, so they're just not
They
what's
have
happening
fixed
right
it. I think they let out some of the urine into space.
now? Wait, there's urine floating around in space right now?
oh, yeah.
Why? Okay, we are burying the lead, man. We got to talk about the space pee.
There used to apparently be floating turds on the back in the Apollo days.
What?
That's so funny.
I know.
Just to think that, Buzz Aldrin's shit is just floating around.
Where no man has gone before.
Yeah, it's
Truly.
true.
He shat in space.
When all of this forms the exterior of an
Yeah.
asteroid and it changes its trajectory so that it's on a collision course for Earth,
Poetic.
and then a shitty asteroid
Wait, how
crashes
much
down.
shit rock is in Saturn's orbit, rings and stuff now? It's
Well, Saturn. I don't think it's all the
I
way
don't
on
think it's
Saturn.
made
We
it-
haven't
well, you know what I
flown
mean,
that
though.
far.
Okay, if there's space debris, and if some planet eventually pulls it into its orbit, right? So,
that would be our planet.
is
Probably.
Buzz Aldrin's poop has just been circling us for decades?
Hey, they
Could be.
say the moon is made of cheese. It's a misnomer. It's made of shit.
Wow. You know what? You learn something every day when you listen to most of innovative companies, right?
All right, Bryan, what are you keeping tabs on?
So if by keeping tabs you mean totally has consumed my life.
Ooh, that's a
Now
good
you guys, I
setup.
think you guys know I'm a gamer,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so there's a new video game out called Pokemon Pokopia. Are you guys familiar with this?
Nope.
So it just came out on for Nintendo Switch 2. They're saying it's going to be the killer app. This is what's people going to buy the system. So you start out as Ditto. Do you guys know who Ditto is?
No.
He's the blob Pokemon.
Never
I'm
been
so
a
out of my
Pokemon
depth
person.
here.
So Ditto transforms into anything. And so you start the game, he transforms.
You'd think I would know this
Yeah, I
stuff,
really feel
but
like you
I
should know.
don't. No, it's
This is
true.
not my
and
scene.
honestly, proud of myself for not knowing this.
Oh, don't worry. I got all the knowledge on
Thank you.
on
Thank you
lock.
so much.
So Ditto transforms into his old trainer, a human, because the thing is, there's no humans. So the game starts out and you're in kind of like this wasteland and everyone's like, where are the humans? And to be clear, it's this very cutesy game where you
Hands
go around.
over the corpse of Ash Ketchum.
Yeah, you walk around and you build habitats for the Pokemon.
Haven't heard
and
that in a minute.
You give them, like berries and stuff because they're very hungry all the time because Ash is not there. There's no humans. And gradually you find like relics and notes left behind from the humans who aren't there anymore. And it's something like climate change coded that like now humans aren't here anymore.
They're like, in this version, we merged with the Game of Thrones universe and we got the ending right. The White Walkers wiped out the Earth.
Yeah.
And then Pocopium arose.
Yeah.
Pocopium is coming.
Yeah, it's here.
I swear, Brian, we're taking this seriously, but it's...
This is a very
trying.
serious
I'm really
I
topic.
was not taking this seriously.
I spent a lot of time making a mansion for my Weepinbell, which is a grass-type Pokemon that evolved from Bellsprout and evolves into Victreebel with the aid of the Leaf Stone. Anyway, but what you do is you're kind of like, it's like Minecraft.
That meant nothing to me.
Yeah. Oh, there's someone out there, and follow me on Twitter if you want to talk more. Somebody out there,
My
somebody
brother's
listening.
listening. He might know. But
Yeah. So it's like you're building all of these environments, and it's just totally my life now. What could you possibly be curious about?
No, I have something to add if I can
Yeah.
get it.
Okay, go for it.
There is a Black Mirror episode that this reminds me of. That is all I have to say.
I mean,
where they're like building out worlds. Okay, I don't want to say too much because it might spoil it. But
well, the thing is
Black Mirror
that
is like a 17-year-old show at this point. I don't know
True,
how
but
many
this
years
was- I
old
wanna
it
say
was.
this was
Is this one of the newer
one of the
seasons?
newer seasons,
Oh, okay,
and
fair.
it really reminds me of this. Anyway,
I mean, I know that it sounds very dark and fucked up, but it's like a very cute, cozy game. Like, oh, it's so cute. So people are comparing it to Animal Crossing. Are you guys familiar with Animal
or like
Crossing?
a Stardew Valley.
Yeah.
sort of
It's
thing,
exactly that genre.
Okay.
And somebody on Twitter was
Actually, I
like,
can get behind that.
it's like,
actually.
have you guys noticed how Nintendo only drops these cozy, immersive games as society is collapsing? Because we had Animal Crossing come out March 2020, and then we got this game coming out.
What did they know?
Everything's chill right now. I don't
just
know.
like-
Yeah.
Yeah, who are the soothsayers?
Stardew Valley dropped the day the BP oil spill happened.
Yeah.
It did not. I have no idea. We gotta get out of this. What's my keeping tabs? My keeping tabs. Someone say equally as nerdy. Real Housewives of Rhode Island dropped last week.
I heard this.
I'm
yeah.
from Rhode Island. Of course, I watched it. And more so than a keeping tabs, this is an apology to my wife or anyone who has to watch Real Housewives of Rhode Island with me in the future. Because the whole time I'm just like, oh, they're at this place. Oh, I went to that restaurant. Oh, my cousin went to high school with him.
Do you know any of the Real Housewives of Rhode Island?
Not personally, but my cousin went to high school with Jared, who's Ashley Iaconetti's husband. They were on the Bachelor franchise together, and now they're in this. So my cousin went to high school with Jared. One of the first locations I went to for a picnic was Goddard State Park on the beach there, which I used to lifeguard at. So
wait, when are you going to be in
when
an
are you gonna
episode?
be-
truly, honestly, we did interview Francis Berwick, who leads Unscripted at Peacock, and was talking about this because this was a while ago. They had just announced this and was talking to her about Real Housewives of Rhode Island. So anyways, I'm going to write the PR and be
Yeah.
like,
So wait-
hey, can I make
Make an appearance.
MIC podcast on the on Real Housewives of Rhode
Can you make
Island?
this happen?
Honestly, I could probably just be somewhere and show up in the background.
Also, while you're talking to the head of Scripted at Peacock, you have to get them to get us on the traders.
I know.
Fast Company Alliance.
we should, oh man, now I need to get Frances Berwick back on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Frances? She doesn't listen to this. Come back on the show. Put Bryan and I on the traders.
Oh man, that would be your dream.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I'll talk
truly.
about Pokemon
Yeah.
at the round table so much that they can be, this guy's clearly is not a traitor. We're not going to banish him.
Oh, no. They would be like, you're definitely not a traitor, but you're certainly a bad and annoying faithful.
Stop talking about Pikachus.
So we're voting you out. You'll get
Habitat.
the Michael Rappaport treatment.
Look, they just don't appreciate the fact that I have taken a wasteland and breathed a new life into it, such that it's filled with cute little creatures who, just make me feel really happy on the inside. So that's the real
Happy
win.
to
So
hear
they can
that.
vote me out, but I saved the environment, and I'm not going to call myself a Pokemon savior.
And that's it for most innovative companies.
But I just did, and I might again.
We've just taken.
We're done. We're going to get out of this. But Vipro, thanks so much for joining
Thank
us.
you for having me. I can't speak.
Our show is produced by Blake Odom, Sam Gebauer, Hawa Tori, and Mariam Kiparuidze. Editing by Matt Toder. Mix and sound design by Tad Wadhams and Nicholas Torres. And our executive producer, the Mewtwo of this podcast. I've literally exhausted my Pokemon knowledge with Ash
pretty good.
Ketchum and Mewtwo. Oh, it's mostly because of Smash Brothers. It's me. I'm the executive producer. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we will see you next week.